Hello, everyone. Welcome to the forum on robotics and control engineering. I am, or shortly FoRCE, I am the FoRCE director, Tansel Yucelen, from Universal South Florida. Since 2016, I was organizing this myself, and now I am glad that we have a co-director, Merve Doğan, from Department of Aerospace Engineering at the Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. She did an excellent job in aligning 5 great talks for this spring 2021 semester. And today, now I am inviting her to introduce our first spring 2021 speaker, Dawn. Merve, the ball is on you.
Thank you, Tansel. Well, hi everyone. So let me thank you for all being here. Welcome to today's FoRCE online seminar. I'm going to talk about the FoRCE a little bit. So FoRCE is dedicated to provide free, high-quality outreach events and online seminars to reach broader robotics and control engineering communities around the world. Thus, we periodically invite the distinguished people like Dr. Sofge here to give their talks on recent research results related to the robotics and the control engineering. And the aim of the course is connecting academicians and the government industry researchers with each other through the research and education discussions here. So we cordially hope that you will enjoy all the FoRCE events and you will find them highly valuable to your own research interests. By taking this opportunity, I also acknowledge the support from IEEE Control System Society, where you can also find the past FoRCE talks and the many other talks at the IEEE CSS video library webpage. So let me also mention about the Webex. You should be all muted during the presentation. If you are not muted right now, please mute yourself. And if you want to ask questions after the presentation, you can do that by simply unmuting yourselves or by posting your questions to the chat box. So note that this session is being recorded to be posted to the FoRCE website. And if you don't want your voice included to this video, use the chat box for asking questions. Well, jointly with the Tansel Yucelen, he is an associate professor at the Department of Mechanical Engineering of the USL. We are very proud today to host Dr. Dawn Sofge from the United States Naval Research Laboratory. Well, Dr. Sofge is a roboticist with 31 years of experience in the artificial intelligence and the control systems research and development. He leads the Distributed Autonomous Systems groups in the Navy Center for Applied Research in Artificial Intelligence, where he develops nature-inspired computing paradigms to challenging problems in sensing, artificial intelligence, and control of autonomous robotic systems. His current research focuses on the control of autonomous teams of the robotic systems for Navy-related missions. He has served as PI on dozens of federally funded research and development programs, and he has more than 150 peer-reviewed related publications. He has served as an advisor on autonomous systems to DARPA, ONR, OSD, ARL, NSF, and NASA, as well as US representative on international TTCP and NATO technical panels on autonomous systems. Also, he has participated as a member of the National Science and Technology Council, the Networking and Information Technology Research and Development Program, Interagency Working Groups. Dawn also occasionally serves as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Maryland, where he teaches graduate level courses in robotics. Well, for all of you who are here, I would like to thank Dawn for participating in our forum as a speaker today. Dawn, as you have the presentation ball, please go ahead and start whenever you are ready.
Dawn, you are muted.
You are muted, Dawn.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be the first speaker in this series this season. I want to give a background in the work that we do, that my group does in particular at the Naval Research Laboratory. So the focus of our work is really, as the group name suggests, distributed autonomous systems. And what that means basically is that we're interested in developing tools and techniques, including both hardware and software, but primarily focused on algorithms, to control teams of autonomous systems. That basically means that we assume that each agent or system, each robot, is capable to some extent of autonomous control, which means that it's able to sense its environment and make decisions and control itself. Basically using sensors, using onboard computers, artificial intelligence, things like that. But the real focus of the group is how to get groups of these systems working together. So these can be controlled in a coordinated sense, as what we more think of as a team, or it can be more swarm-like. And I want to go into some detail about sort of what makes a swarm and what swarm robotics is all about. But before I do that, I want to give an introduction to where I work. So where I work is the Laboratory for Autonomous Systems Research. And what the easiest way to do this is to just show you a fairly short, I think it's 2 or 3 minute video clip of a TV production that was done a couple of years back, talking about the Laboratory for Autonomous Systems Research. And so I'm going to play that, and then after that I want to talk about what is swarm robotics and give kind of a general background in swarm robotics. And after that I'll go into details about the research that's done in my group. Okay? All right, so forward. Okay, let me play this video for you.
Researchers testing future devices create virtual worlds. Where are we now? This is our desert high bay. It's used to simulate desert-type environments. Robots need to work everywhere, even in jungles. It looks like I'm in a rainforest, but in fact, I'm not. Future drones get a workout in a robot gymnasium. Why do you test it in this room?
This is more of an environment that we can control while we hammer out all the bugs.
And this high-tech pool is a simulated ocean with extras. There's a set of 12 underwater cameras that are placed around the wall of the pool, testing the future in a simulated world. I'm Chuck Pell. I'm an artist, entrepreneur, and futurist. We'll see the ultimate research facility in this edition of Earth 2050. Welcome to Earth 2050. One of the things I love about this job is that I get to go where the future is being created. I recently got a tour of the Naval Research Laboratory's Laboratory for Autonomous Systems Research in Washington, D.C. It's a premier testing and research facility for future tech. From the outside, the NRL is pretty unimposing, but inside, it's 50,000 square feet of testing and research into all sorts of devices that can fly, walk, and swim. In this facility, they're testing a whole host of machines, and almost all of them are designed to run by themselves.
Okay, so basically that's an excerpt from a TV program that was put together. I think it's 30 minutes altogether, but obviously that's just a few minutes. And this was a Canadian company that produces this sort of Saturday morning TV show on science and technology and things like that, called Exploration Earth 2050. You can find the full-length program if you're interested. It goes into a lot more detail about what we do in projects at LASER, as we call it, Laboratory for Autonomous Systems Research. Okay, so next I want to talk about what is swarm robotics. Okay, so swarm robotics is really a combination of two things: swarm intelligence and robotics. So assume that, everyone is probably pretty familiar with robotics, but maybe not so much with swarm intelligence. So the swarm intelligence actually goes back a couple of decades at least. And it's really, the key idea is that we look at social insects, look at the collective behavior of social insects, such as ants and bees and such, and then try to infer what are the operating principles. The observation is that these creatures are able to collectively do pretty amazing things. They work together. They're interacting with one another, interacting with their environment. But individually, we think that they're not that smart, but collectively, they're very, very, very capable. So the idea is we would like to be able to replicate some of these capabilities and imbue our artificial systems with the capability so that we can form collectives of these artificial agents that can do pretty amazing things too. But of course, we want them to do things that are of use to us, and as since I work for the Navy, of course, thinking about Navy missions and what kind of things can swarms do for us. Okay. So this is a definition from Bonobo, Dorigo, and Thurlow. It's any attempt to design algorithms or distributed problem-solving devices inspired by the collective behavior of social insect colonies and other animal societies. And you can see example of an ant robot that's inspired by an actual ant. And there have been researchers who have embedded little robotic ants with actual ants to try to get them to work as part of the team or the colony. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is figure out what are the ants, what are they thinking, basically? What are their behaviors? What are they sensing? And can we simulate this? Can we replicate it? Okay. So just for an example, you could have a swarm of robots or a swarm of ants that are working collectively. We can also think about birds. Normally we think more about flocks, and I mean, there are other terms for groupings. For every particular type of animal, there's a term for a larger number of them. But we can think about what do these large numbers of birds do? How are they operating? Even we want to sort of get inside the head of the bird and understand what is it sensing, what can it see, feel, and what is its goal? How is it deciding what to do at every instant in time? And of course, this is useful if we want to create our own swarm of flying robots that are working together. Okay. So another view of swarm intelligence is from the perspective of AI, artificial intelligence. So you can think of it as an AI technique or a group of AI techniques that are based on the collective behavior or some collective behavior in decentralized self-organized systems. Generally, these are made up of agents who interact with each other and the environment. So this work can lean heavily on the literature in agents and multi-agent systems. There are a number of conferences every year that are focused on multi-agent systems, which to some extent overlap with robotics, but often don't. So there's a lot of things you can do with agents and multi-agent systems. So that's one interesting thing about swarm intelligence and swarm robotics is that we can leverage this work to build robotic swarms. One of the key features is that typically there's no centralized control structure. If you think about how colonies of ants or bees or whatever operate, there's no boss really. I mean, with ants, there is a queen, but the queen is primarily laying eggs and so forth. The queen isn't like giving commands to the colony and telling them what to do. And in fact, there's no one particular ant that's doing that. Basically, they're figuring it all out. collectively. And so we're very much interested in understanding how this form of collective decision making works. Okay. This is particularly interesting from the perspective of the biology of the brains of these insects. So insects really only have a few hundred brain cells, but they're able to collectively do pretty amazing things. So over on the left, you can see an example of an extracted ant nest. It was extracted from the ground. How are they able to produce these things? How does this happen? In fact, we know that that ants are, from the perspective of a species working together as a group, they may be second only to humans in terms of complexity, and that there are ants that they bury their dead. They do farming. So they farm for food. They do all sorts of amazing things, but they do this with a very limited number of brain cells. So we're very much interested in trying to understand this and understand how they are able to achieve this. Okay. Some of the characteristics of swarm intelligence are typically a swarm is composed of many individuals. The individuals are homogeneous, although that's not always strictly the case. You can have heterogeneous swarms, but and we know with ants and bees, in fact, that there is more than one type, but there's not a large number of types. So most of them are the same. And the most importantly, perhaps, is that they interact locally, local interaction. So again, we have this issue where you don't want centralized control, because centralized control implies that you have some knowledge, or something has some knowledge of every individual, where it is, what it's doing, and so forth. And it doesn't scale well. You have the a problem in that you want whatever algorithms, whatever control that you come up with for your swarm to be scalable to large numbers. And that means that the decisions have to be made at the local level based only on local sensing, local interactions. Okay. And then finally, self-organization is how do they organize into groups. With ants, we see them they are able to work together to do collective carry, to scout for food and things like that, to build nests. And how do they do that? How do you take a large number and decide, all right, this group is going to work on this thing, that group is going to be working on that. In fact, you're not doing it from a top-down perspective. It's all bottom-up. So we're trying to understand how this bottom-up self-organization really works. Okay. So 4 ingredients of self-organization are positive feedback, negative feedback, amplification of randomness, and reliance on multiple interactions. Okay. An example of this is with leafcutter ants. So the leafcutter ants, they cut leaves from plants and trees. The workers forage for leaves from far away, and they literally organize highways to and from their foraging sites. Another example is what we call weaver ants. So weaver ants are able to form chains using their bodies. This allows them to cross gaps and pull leaf edges together to form a nest. Chains can join to form a bigger one, and so that workers can go back and forth. They basically form like a bridge. Yeah, so the idea is, you can see from the picture that basically they're working together to pull these leaves together to build their nest. Okay. Another example is army ants. They do these hunting raids where they have a large number up to 200,000 or so workers, in which they go out and do hunting and they collect prey and bring it back and feed the colony. Okay. So just in general benefits of ant colony swarms are the better foraging, settling in an organized home, and defense against predators. So, and the other thing is these social insects have survived for millions of years. So, you know, there must be an evolutionary advantage to this form of intelligence. Okay, so how does this all happen? Well, so there are two different main types of interaction in the swarm. So there are direct interactions in terms of exchanging food or liquids, visual contact, although the visual abilities of insects varies greatly. Some use vision more than others. And then the other one that is somewhat foreign to us is chemical contact through pheromones, using odors that are deposited and observed that the ants can sense, and that's how trails are formed and they're, you know, I'm not going to go into detail, but there are algorithms from artificial intelligence on ant colony optimization and so forth that use this notion of using these chemical trails that evaporate over time, and it's been shown that these techniques can be used as very effective optimization techniques for collective decision making by these multi-agent systems, in this case, colonies of ants. So that's the first way is direct interaction. Second way is indirect interaction or stigmergy, which basically means that the individual modifies the environment in some way, and then the individuals respond to that. The behavior of the individuals is reflected in that modified environment. So just to give an example about sort of the complexity that can result from these local interactions is you can see this swarm of birds and it's exhibiting very complex dynamics. And there's been some work in trying to understand what are the dynamics of these things. And some of the work I'm going to talk about a little bit is how are these dynamics affected by things like noise and time delays and sensing and so forth. How is information communicated across the swarm? What is the swarm doing? You know, in some cases, you know, you'll have a group of birds like this that are chimney swifts, and they're moving as a group, and ultimately they may settle in a chimney or tree or a group of trees or something like that. So we can try to figure out what is the goal, collective goal of the system. How are they communicating? How are they individually making decisions as to what to do next? You know, if you envision yourself or imagine that you're one of the birds in this swarm, what do you see? You should see maybe the other birds around you. You feel currents. You also have some idea of the overall goal. You know, maybe you're hungry or something. I don't know, you know, what drives them really. But, you know, we want to sort of get inside the behavior and try to understand the behavior of the swarm from an individual level. Okay, so that sort of brings us to what is swarm robotics. So in robotics, traditionally, we focus on the development of highly capable and expensive robots, you know, one at a time or a few at a time, maybe. So one example would be a Predator unmanned air vehicle. But with swarm robotics, really the emphasis is on having lots of relatively inexpensive robots. So an example of this would be micro air vehicles. Okay. Some of the advantages of robot swarms are that they can be effective. They can perform tasks that one expensive robot can't do. and they can be robust so that even if some of the robots fail, the swarm can still achieve the task. Some examples of tasks that could be performed using a swarm of robots is area coverage, such as foraging, search and rescue operations, reconnaissance missions, surveillance missions, and also convoy or formation movement, such as organizing the group into a formation, movement toward a goal, avoiding obstacles, or chemical plume tracing, tracing the source of a chemical plume. And this can be done in air or in water, whatever the medium is. Okay, so one scenario, just from a sort of a Department of Defense perspective, is that you might want to use a group or swarm of unmanned aerial vehicles to work together to cooperate to detect targets. So in this scene, you can see that we have a number of these vehicles that are flying overhead, and there's some target down in the trees, and maybe you know, they're covering different parts of the space, and they're looking for this target. In this case, it's this little tank that's on the ground. So that's one idea for how you might want to use these things. Some work has been done in terms of like creating, you know, simulations with surveillance, and then we can come up with techniques for deciding, you know, how the vehicles are deployed, how they interact with one another, and interact with the environment. So this sort of brings me to some of the work that my group has done. This was a project that started a few years back. It's called Mantis, or Mobile Autonomous Navy Teams for Information Search and Surveillance. And the idea is that we wanted to leverage prior work that was done at the Naval Research Laboratory on a technique called physico-mimetics. And the idea behind physico-mimetics was, or is, that basically you have particles or particle types, and you can define your agents as particle types and objects in your environment as other particle types. And then basically you define the force laws about how these particles interact. And once you define these force laws, they can be both attractive and repulsive. And once you define the force laws, essentially you've created the behaviors for the swarm, and you can tune the behaviors, adjust the behaviors based on adjusting the force laws governing the interaction. So this is the basic idea, and so we've built upon this notion, and what's shown in the figure is basically what we call an information surface. So essentially, the agents are scanning this surface, and they're looking for objects of interest, and then the information surface is being updated, you know, as it go. And this technique is allows the agents to share the information that they gather and the information on the surface with their neighbors. So it can be implemented as a centralized technique, but it can also be distributed. Okay, so again, this was the focus of this effort, Mantis, was to develop and apply information gathering algorithms for multi-agent systems. And we wanted to leverage nature-inspired techniques, you know, as I mentioned, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those techniques like grazing and so forth. And swarm control algorithms, so physico-mimetics, like I was talking about, and information theory. So from an information theoretic perspective, basically we can think about at each time step, we want each agent to move in such a direction or a way so that the information gain is maximized. Okay, So you can think about this from sort of a global perspective and say, all right, how could I do planning for this team or swarm in such a way to maximize information gain at each step? But we want to do this in a non-centralized way, which is still more challenging. And then say, all right, based only on local information, whatever the agent is sensing and what control it has available to it, how can it behave in such a way that information gain for the group as a whole is maximized? Okay, so the approach to this was basically to cast information gathering techniques as guidance algorithms, and then to evaluate their efficiency and robustness on area coverage tasks such as surveillance and reconnaissance and so forth. Okay. So as I mentioned, one of the approaches to this is to look at grazing behaviors. So we can look at how various animals graze as groups, and we can create simple techniques for doing grazing, and then use information theory as a way of sort of updating or providing guidance for those behaviors and for the controls. So in this analogy, basically, rather than grazing for food, we're grazing for information. Okay. And there's been a good bit of literature in the robotics field on using information theoretic approaches for information gathering for multi-agent systems. Okay. So another thing that we're interested in doing, and I'm just going to show these two videos, is basically matching simulation with reality. We'd like to be able to develop simulators and to be able to test out ideas in simulation and then try them in the real world. There's this problem of moving from simulation to the real world we call the reality gap. But this was an example of trying to come up with a planner that was risk sensitive, that's sensitive to threats from the environment and such, and then have these agents be able to do this area coverage task while sensing objects of interest. One of the trade-offs there is that the closer you get potentially to a dangerous object, the greater the chance of being shot down, but then you get a better view of it as well. So you're gathering more information as you get closer, but then you're also increasing your risk. So in designing the controllers for these systems or planners for these systems, we want to sort of balance what is the risk versus what is the gain of information. So I'm just going to show these two videos. Okay, so you can see that they're more or less synced up, and this was in addition to sort of a foray into designing planning for multi-agent systems. We're also kind of exploring different types of simulation environments and how we can sync up our simulators with the actual robots. Okay. All right. So another area that we're very much interested in is search and rescue, these so-called HADR or humanitarian assistance disaster response scenarios. So one of the scenarios that we're interested in is, for example, if you have a person, for example, who goes down in a contested area, and you have two teams that are searching for that person. You have your team, the blue team, and then you have the red team, who's the adversary. And we make assumptions that that these areas are, since they're contested, that it's possible to use jamming. Okay. In the DoD, we refer to what is called A2AD areas where the adversary can basically interfere with your operations. Anti-access area denial, I think, something like that. So the assumption is, all right, we can go in, the adversary can jam comms, we can jam comms, but if we jam comms, then we are also jamming our own communications and making it more difficult to collaborate, right? So the question then is, can we figure out what is an optimal strategy for our team to go in and use in these environments to perform this search and rescue operation, given that we know that the adversary will also be there and will be operating. So we did a study on this and actually have a couple of journal articles where we have a nice result that sort of explored what the optimal strategy is in these scenarios with respect to jamming or not jamming and operation of our multi-agent systems. Okay. Again, going back to sort of the idea of physical mimetics, we were able to create something called a distributed states of matter motion planner. And again, this is building on this concept that I mentioned, where you have this information surface that's being shared and updated amongst the swarm. And we found that by properly defining the control laws for this team, this group, that we're able to produce an effective area coverage behavior for the swarm so that the agents are able to discover objects of interest in the field. And once they're discovered, they're tagged, they're marked, and they're no longer interesting. And then the agent sort of moves on. So we demonstrated that we could do this to do area coverage and also for tracking, so that we can track targets of interest in an area. Okay. So this work kind of led us to another project which was funded by the Office of Naval Research. And this was really focused on looking at the dynamics of swarms and trying to understand what affects the dynamics. So the title is Coherence and Decoherence of Patterns in Swarms with Potential Collisions. And this was based on the notion that we can come up with control laws and we can study dynamics of these swarms. But what we find in reality is that these simulations, these sort of mathematical models, don't take reality into account. In other words, they treat the agents as sort of point mass particles where they can pass through one another, they can't collide. If they do, you don't assume that anything bad happens. They don't have any mass or momentum or anything like that. So what we decided to do was to change those assumptions. And what's shown here is basically a study of dynamics where we produce different swarm behaviors by changing the amount of delay in the information. So that basically they're interacting with their neighbors, but that information can be delayed. We also look at what happens if that information is noisy, for example, from sensor noise. And we show that in fact, can produce two distinctly different behaviors based on the levels of delay and noise. So that's all very interesting. But again, I come back to this notion of what happens if we relax the assumptions and we say, all right, instead of them not being able to collide, we say if they can collide, and if they do collide, let's assume they're destroyed. Okay, so clearly what happens is most of them do collide, and then we assume they're destroyed, so we take them off the board, and there aren't many left. Okay, so it's fine. So what's the next step? The next step is to say, well, let's make sure that they don't collide. So one way to do that is that you add a repulsion term. Okay, so they are interacting locally. They're repelling one another because we don't want them to collide. But of course, what happens, that interferes with the dynamics of the swarm, okay? So they don't really form the nice patterns that we were sensing before. So, okay, we say, let's try something else. Let's only have a few of them have collision avoidance. Well, that doesn't really work either. You know, they're still pretty disorganized. So, you know, we can try other things. So one of the things that we looked at was we can use a potential field method so that, you know, things are, so you see all these agents that are crossing one another, and basically they're using sort of a local collision avoidance using a potential field. But a better technique is to use barrier functions, barrier certificates, and using this method, we see that we get better performance. In fact, there are no collision. So there is hope. We can implement local rules and behaviors to avoid collisions and still exhibit some group dynamics. Okay, so the next step was basically implementing some of these techniques and looking at how we can do demonstrations with actual robots. And this is a video that's taken with more than 25 blimps. So when I say blimps, I'm referring to what you see here are the Georgia Tech Miniature Autonomous Blimp or GT-MAB platform. So we're working with Professor Fumin Zhang at Georgia Tech, and he developed this blimp, especially the ones with the single envelopes, the balloons that we call envelopes. And we've been collaborating with him to develop sort of a large number of these. And we started to basically experiment with creating formations and doing area coverage and things like that using these blimps. After we started developing and testing them out in large numbers, we discovered that there were some limitations to them. And the limitations were based on how they interact with one another and sort of the capabilities of the balloons themselves, of the blimps themselves. So we decided to kind of explore this design space, and we came up with a number of different designs. So we have a single prop, a biprop, a delta, I-beam, and so forth. And we found that these sort of exhibit different behaviors. So this is an example of a single prop spinner that by angling the prop, we found that we can control where the blimp goes. But of course, the problem is only with a single prop, it's going to be spinning all of the time, which is sort of an interesting behavior, but rather limited. And then this other design we came up with, which we call sticky buns, where we have two of them. And in fact, what's shown in the video is that one is following the other using a ultrasonic range sensor. So another thing that we discovered, very interesting effect, was that if you add a tether or string to the blimp, then it drags on the floor, and that actually induces a lot of stability into the platform. And we're studying this, and we're trying to understand what are the dynamics of it. Why does it induce so much stability? And it's interesting that the string doesn't really need to have much contact with the floor for this to be effective. You can also make the tether larger. You can use larger balloons so that you can provide power and data and whatever, which is nice because then you can add sensors to the balloon. You can have a blimp that is flying above with cameras and comms units and things like that, and you can keep it aloft as long as you want, as long as there's not too much wind and so forth preventing you from using it. So another design, this wasn't us, but a collaborator, Sridhar Ravi at University of New South Wales, is exploring flapping wing blimps. And we're interested in this, and notice that he also has a little string that is dragging along that helps to stabilize the blimp. So, you know, we're interested in exploring sort of different designs. This one, he's using flapping wings rather than propellers. And you know, we have controllers for teleoperating this blimp. And then we're, you know, in the process of working with Professor Ravi to build autonomous control for this platform. Okay. So some of the work that we've done with our miniature autonomous blimp platforms, we're interested in exploring emergent behaviors. So one of the things that we noticed with our blimps was that as they would sort of approach like the back wall, they would start to climb the wall. And we're like, well, that's interesting. And the reason for that is because they have a sensor on the bottom, which we call a ping sensor, which is basically a ultrasonic range sensor that is designed to provide a distance estimate. And we have a control on board that we're telling it to maintain a certain altitude. So we give it the altitude. And what's happening is that the range sensor has sort of a field of view that is intersecting the wall or whatever's beneath it. And because of that, it's returning a signal and it's saying, well, I need to climb. Okay. So we decided to try to take advantage of this effect and program a large number of these balloons, blimps, to go from one position, say on the left, to another position on the right. And we didn't tell them that there's actually a wall in between. Okay. So the net effect is that they hit the wall and then they start climbing on top of one another and they climb over the wall. All but, you know, a couple that are left behind are the ones that sort of got stepped on. But most of the swarm makes it over the wall. And we thought, well, this is a very interesting emergent effect. Requires no centralized or global control. And it's just as a result of this local behavior and the interaction based on this, range sensor. Okay. Another thing that we have been looking at is using gestures. So what's happening here is that one of the PhD students in my group, Divya Srivastava, she's a PhD student at Georgia Tech. She was using a smartwatch that has an onboard motion sensor, and using the smartwatch, she was able to do gestures, and then we're able to recognize the arm gestures and use that to send commands to the swarm. And you can see that the gestures she uses tells the swarm to sort of move apart in a horizontal line or vertical line or group together. You can do follow me. You can do whatever behaviors you want, and these can be interpreted from the human. Other people have done vision-based control. This is gesture-based control. Okay. Another thing we're interested in is communication, is how to, in fact, can we use means for communicating between blimps that are very difficult to jam. So we know that RF signals can be jammed. So we're interested in, this is a current project we're doing, we're exploring use of light and light-based communication. And in this example, basically you have one blimp that is using flashing LEDs to communicate its position with another blimp that has sensors on board. And, you know, we're exploring sort of expanding this capability so that every blimp, in fact, would be able to both send and receive using light. Okay. Another project that is currently ongoing, this is by a grad student at University of Maryland, Lloyd McGuire. He is building on the notion of physical mimetics, but he's sort of expanding it, and he's looking at designing swarm behaviors based on viscoelastic fluids. And so an example is you see this oil in this beaker that sort of is flowing out, and the way this works is that the force interaction laws between the molecules allow the group to stay together, sort of stuck together in a way. And we can take advantage of this to allow the swarm to escape from local minima and go around objects. Or one of the the frequent criticisms of potential field-based methods is that they can get stuck in local minima. And we're showing here that we can use sort of this viscoelastic fluid control law as a way of preventing that from happening. Okay. We're also interested in sort of exploring other ways for doing distributed and decentralized area coverage. This was a project by John Kelly at Naval from Naval Lakehurst, who did a rotation in my group. And the idea here was basically to use this notion of deployment entropy and come up with an algorithm that allows a swarm to cover an area using only local knowledge. So essentially what you see is you have a grid, a space over which they want to do coverage, but you can't assume that every agent knows where every other agent is. You can only assume that each agent knows where its neighbors are, it's the ones in its group. And we showed that basically by sort of adjusting the density of the agents, that they can form sort of an area, they can cover an area using only local knowledge and local control. Another effort that is sort of ongoing, kind of it started with Tony Lin and from a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and Gurpreet Singh from Naval Lakehurst, was looking at, can we use reinforcement learning, deep reinforcement learning, to sort of optimize the behavior of these teams and swarms of systems. And so this work has progressed. We have some recent publications in this area, and we've shown that in fact we can use deep reinforcement learning, and we can to have like a group of agents go out and perform a task, whether it's surrounding an invader or working together for some particular mission. Okay, another effort, and this is more from kind of sort of the biologically inspired control perspective, is looking at a technique called quorum sensing. So the idea behind quorum sensing is that you have a number of agents that basically make a local decision about something. And this is something that's present in, it's used by ants, it's used by slime molds, it's used in a lot of very low-level creatures, low-level life forms, in which basically they sort of make a local decision, and then they produce a chemical response, and the other agents, creatures, are able to sense that chemical response and respond to it. And so we're interested in sort of exploring this notion and trying to understand how we can make group decisions. In this case, basically, the agents were sort of trying to figure out, what's a good nesting site to move to. Okay, this was a sort of a site selection problem. This is an extension of that work by another one of my students. This was a high school student, Shreya Corona, who will be joining me this summer through an internship. Okay, so I'm sort of running out of time. I want to just highlight some of our recent publications. We have a large number of students who come through the group and join the group when possible, and we really do encourage publishing. So before I wrap up, I'm going to play a little video which sort of shows some of my group in action and gives kind of an overview of what we do and why we do it. So bear with me and see if I can get this to play.
Try to think about it from the perspective of the individual.
All right, let me open this up. All right, let me know if you can't hear this.
Fish. So if you're a fish in this school, you're swimming along, what are you sensing? But from the perspective of the individual fish.
Can you guys hear that? Can you see it, more importantly?
Yes, we can. We can see it here.
All right, can you?
Loud and clear. It's great.
All right, let me move this back.
The behaviors or control laws that you're executing to be part of that school. So we have people who have developed mathematical models of this. And once we develop models, then we can implement those on artificial systems. So each agent is autonomous. It is sent.
Can you see the video or you just hear my voice?
So from my side, video doesn't proceed. So it is like fixed it stopped at 0.16 seconds, but we can just hear the voice. At least I can just hear the voice.
Okay, it keeps switching screens on me. Let me try moving it back to the other screen and try that again. All right, bear with me. I don't know why it's switching which screen I'm sharing, but let me see if it's driving me crazy. I did it again.
Try to think about it.
It does not. All right, let me stop sharing and then tell it to share the other screen if I can. I don't know why it keeps switching on me. Okay.
From the perspective of the individual fish. So if you're a fish in this school, you're swimming along.
Sorry, it keeps switching. Whatever screen I'm presenting on, it switches to the other one. Maybe if I don't go full screen, it will work. Let me try that.
What are you sensing? But from the perspective of the individual fish, what are the behaviors or control laws that you're executing to be part of that school? So we have people who have developed mathematical models of this. And once we develop models, then we can implement those on artificial systems. So each agent is autonomous. It is sensing its environment. It has goals. It's making decisions. If you think in terms of social insects such as bees or ants, they effectively operate with no centralized control.
The agents, it's kind of the same thing. They're able to talk to each other, or they're able to see each other, or just look at their local surroundings and react to that. The point of these guys is that none of them really have a global reference of what everyone else is doing. That's not that's not going to be scalable when we get into the field. It's just going to make things too slow. So what these guys are, they are lighter than air aircraft, and we use them for autonomous systems research, multi-agent research, and specifically emergence within swarms. So the neat thing here is we can attach different sensors, we can attach different payloads to what we call the gondolas, and we can put them all up in the air at the same time and see what type of behaviors we get back.
You can just test out control algorithms on them without having to worry about like flight dynamics or the environment around them or collisions, because if they collide, they're not going to like break each other or anything. So that's really useful in testing out a lot of theory.
Leverage what we learned from nature and develop these bottom-up approaches to swarming so that we can use large numbers of fairly inexpensive platforms working together to do useful things for the Navy.
That I think is the more interesting part of research, and you get to actually work with your hands and build something and see an actual like result versus seeing it in a simulation.
All of the factors point, positive in the direction of developing these platforms and adding new capabilities to them. This allows us to identify opportunities for the Navy to incorporate new sensing modalities, new types of onboard information processing that can be used to elevate unmanned systems to make them more autonomous.
Okay.
Try to think of it.
Oh, sorry. I'll get it switched back to the other screen now.
Try to think about it from the perspective of the individual fish.
All right.
So if you're a fish in this school, you're swimming along, what are you sensing? But from the perspective of the individual fish, what
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, are we sharing? Okay. Let me share my, go back to sharing my screen. Let's try this. Share. Share. Okay, sharing again. All right, can you still hear me? You can hear me, good. All right, so yeah, I wanted to sort of wrap up with just a sort of a promo. So I want to talk a lot of, we do have a lot of interns that come through the program, that come through Laser. As you could see in that video, some of my students, you know, I encourage, you know, particularly grad students, PhD students to apply. We actually have, you know, people all the way from high school, undergrad, graduate students, postdocs, some faculty members, you know, people from other warfare centers that do rotations through the lab. So it's a really great environment for doing research. And, you know, we have people who are making contributions at every level. So one of my favorite programs to use is called INREP, NREIP. And here's a little poster for it. So if you're a student and you're interested in working in the lab, I encourage you to apply through the INREP program. The website is on the screen. And let me know that you've applied. Let me know that you're interested in, you know, send me an email. Let me know what you're interested in doing. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak with you and talk about some of the work that I do and my group does. And if you're interested and you have further questions, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email address is right here on the screen. Or, you know, if we have I don't know if we have a couple of minutes for questions now, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you for the excellent presentation. I really enjoyed with all the information and the videos. So it's time to take questions. So if you have any questions, just unmute yourself, and you can also type to chat if you don't want your voice included to video. And if you have more private questions, you can just email them directly.
I have one question actually. I was just wondering. So Don, yeah, great presentation. Thanks for your time. So, so as you know, I mean, for example, considering certain applications with local information, I mean, let me put it this way: when you have centralized information, you can very easily generate complex behaviors, like, you know, which agent should go to which point. Pretty much easy, but of course, as you mentioned, centralized information is not practical and reliable. So, like with distributed information or local information exchange in your branch, so in your group, are you guys working on any, you know, complex behaviors?
Yeah. So, you know, some of the things we talked about, we're looking at behaviors for doing area coverage. We're using deep learning, deep neural networks, and reinforcement learning to learn collective behaviors, such as having a team of agents work together to, you know, to go to a certain position, maybe to, you know, surround an object or something like that. We're working on behaviors for tracking. You know, the focus really is on coming up with behaviors, and you know, I focus on behavior because ultimately we want to produce desirable emergent behaviors. So I see we have a question up here. What are the current main challenges of implementing a decentralized multi-agent system? So the main challenge, I would say, is trying to figure out how to design a low-level behavior that produces a desirable emergent effect. Okay. So if we're designing, say, a centralized system, we can just say, all right, this is what we want the system to do. Here's sort of the objective. We want to maximize the objective function value, and then we come up with the controls for each agent. Well, that assumes that you have complete and total knowledge of where every agent is at all times. We really want to do this in a bottom-up fashion so that each agent is independently sensing and reacting to the environment and to the other agents, and executing its local behavior, and that collectively this produces a desirable emergent behavior. So this is really the hardest part. It's the trickiest part of it all, is trying to design these low-level behaviors and then trying to understand the effects of what if you have time delays or noise in the system, or other things that may be interfering with your emergent behavior. So yeah, that's the greatest challenge, and we're using techniques like reinforcement learning to try to generate these behaviors, even when we maybe we can't really think about what they might be, but maybe using machine learning we can sort of come up with useful behaviors. So yeah.
Take it on.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi, Don. I just have a quick question. Basically, for a multi-agent system, how can you sweep an area efficiently?
How can you use what?
How can you sweep a certain area using, let's say, 3 or 4 drones in an efficient manner? And how can you implement that to their algorithm? Like they would have their own control algorithm, and then you would have to sweep an area.
Sure. So basically, that's an area coverage task. There are a few different ways that you can do that. So the simplest and probably most common way is to use a multi-agent version of basically a lawnmower path. So you can envision with a single agent, basically, you have that agent go up, turn around, come back, and it is doing sort of a lawnmower pattern. You can do sort of a multi-agent version of this where you have multiple agents that do this in parallel. You can also have them sense their neighbors, so it's not completely cheating to sort of distribute this amongst multiple agents. So that's one way, kind of a boring way to do it, but you can certainly do that. You can do something like what I showed in the presentation with the states of matter and motion planner. I didn't go into details about that, but the reason it's called a states of matter and motion planner is because you design the force laws such that the agents act as either a solid or a liquid or a gas. And in the gas phase, basically, they're sort of bouncing off one another and they're filling the space. So one way to sort of sweep the area or cover the area would be to design a physical mimetic based controller with using a sort of a gas law, so that the agents are acting like molecules of gas and they're bouncing around and they're like doing area coverage. There are various other things you can do. I showed you the deployment entropy method, in which agents are covering an area. Now, instead of just straight coverage, you said you want to sweep. So what you can do is you can introduce like an attractor. So you can have them attracted to, say, you start them on one side of the field and they're attracted to the opposite side of the field. So as they're sort of going through, sweeping the area, they're sort of moving along. So you can do that as well. So there are lots of different ways to do it. And there are, multiple ways to do it that are scalable, that are decentralized and scalable. Okay.
So
Okay.
Don, do you have time for more questions? There are several questions in the chat.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, how would inverse reinforcement learning for learning reward functions perform on multi-agent systems with imperfect communication? So this is an interesting question. We are interested in using inverse reinforcement learning, where it's basically a form of imitation learning, in which you have someone sort of demonstrating, all right, I'd like for you to do this and this and this and this. And you're sort of gathering data, you're collecting data from that, and using that to build your reward function. So this can be done with individual agents, or you can extend it to multi-agent systems, but you'd have to do it in such a way that the agents are only able to sense their surroundings, the other agents that are next to them, and how you actually would do the demonstration part of it for a multi-agent system, I think would probably be the trickiest part of that. Is how do you force that you're not assuming global information, that you're only using local information. It's an interesting idea, but I think the specific implementation details would depend on the task, and how you do the demonstration part of it for a multi-agent task. Okay. All right. Next question. How to apply REEF on real-time flight data of birds, insects for obtaining optimal reward function to represent their behavior. Okay. So there's definitely some work that's been done in this. You go back to some of the work by Tucker Balch when he was at Georgia Tech. I think he's at CMU now. I forget where Tucker is, but he did a lot of work in designing multi-agent controllers. And so one of the challenges is, how can you observe what animals are, what multi-agent systems are doing? So there's been a lot of work done with capturing video and taking video of say birds or insects or whatever, and then through those videos, essentially you have to track each individual. And there's been a lot of work done in sort of improving the software techniques for tracking the individuals. Once you can do that, once you can take video and you can track each individual bird or insect or whatever, then you can basically store their trajectories, their flight trajectories, and do that to try to infer what is their behavior, or what are the control laws. This has also been done for fish. In particular, you look at some of the work by Ian Cousin at Princeton University. He's done a lot of work in sort of modeling schools of fish and schooling behaviors. So you can do this either analytically, or you can do this using some sort of a reinforcement learning technique. So yeah, it's doable. You start with data in the form of a video generally, and from that you have to extract what are the trajectories of the individual agents, and then use that to start designing your controller. Okay, any other questions? Okay. I can't hear you.
Tansel, you are muted.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. No, I thought, so your internet is okay, right? So your internet is changing. So
Yeah, it is getting slower and slower sometimes. I'm just confused. Okay, I think those are all the questions. Atahan, did you get your answer? Then I would like to restate the question because whenever we post this video, the audience are not allowed to see the chat. The question was about applying inverse reinforcement learning on the real-time flying data. So thank you for your presentation again. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed. So take care. I think we can end the session.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And again, if anyone has any further questions or you can reach out to me. My email address you see is in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And again, I encourage grad students, PhD students to apply through the NREP program if you're interested in doing an internship at Naval Research Laboratory. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
thanks, Don. Thanks, everyone. All right.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.